Tonight, I'm going to take you deep into the icy heart of Alaska, a place of breathtaking beauty, but also a place where secrets can hide for decades. This is the story of a young woman whose life was filled with promise, whose days were bright with laughter and ambition, until one cold September morning in 1994, when everything changed forever. I'm Hannah, and you're listening to Whispers of Crime. Bonnie Christine Craig was born on March 30th, 1976, in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Her parents, Karen and Gordon Craig, had known each other since high school. In fact, Karen became pregnant with Bonnie's older brother, Jason, when she was just 17. She and Gordon married in July of 1973, and 3 years later, Bonnie came into the world, a first daughter for her parents and the first granddaughter in the family. Everyone was overjoyed to welcome a baby girl, but by the time Bonnie was 3, her parents' marriage had ended. Her father wasn't a steady presence in her life, and that left a void, until her mother met someone new. His name was Gary Campbell. He cared deeply for Karen and her children, and before long, Karen and Gary married. When Bonnie was 5, they welcomed a baby boy named Adam into the family. Just a year later, another baby arrived, a little girl named Samantha. For Bonnie, having a baby sister was exciting. She could dress Samantha in princess gowns and toy jewelry, something her younger brother Adam definitely wouldn't allow. As Samantha grew, she idolized Bonnie. After all, Bonnie was 6 years older, loving, full of life, and good at everything she set her mind to, especially academics. Samantha thought they shared the same parents, until one day in 3rd grade, she learned that Bonnie was her half-sister. The news broke her heart. Like Bonnie never treated her differently. She loved and cared for Adam and Samantha as if they were her own children. Life in the Campbell household meant constant change. Gary worked for BP Oil, and the family moved frequently for his job. Bonnie attended 6 elementary schools and 2 junior high schools. But instead of being crushed by all the changes, she adapted, learning quickly how to sit in wherever she landed. From Calgary, the family moved to San Francisco, settling in the East Bay area. They had a pool and a large backyard, paradise for kids. But before they could truly settle in, Gary's work took them north to Anchorage, Alaska. Strangely enough, Alaska appealed to the children even more than California. But that chapter was short-lived. Gary's job soon took them from Alaska to Midland, Texas, and later to Houston. They stayed only a few months in Sugar Land before packing up again and returning to Alaska, back to Anchorage, which felt like home. Bonnie was in junior high when another upheaval hit. Karen and Gary divorced. The children were devastated. To Bonnie, Gary was her father in every way that mattered, and the split meant Adam and Samantha would spend alternating weeks between their parents. Still, Bonnie remained close to Gary. She wasn't the type to fade into the background. Bonnie was active in sports, music, and community activities. She coached swim and diving teams, rode horses, wrote poetry, played the violin and viola in the school orchestra, and even became the first girl to join the Service High School wrestling team. Then came a tragedy that left a permanent mark. Bonnie's best friend, Katie Garcia, died in a drunk driving accident. The loss shook Bonnie to her core. From that day forward, she vowed never to drink alcohol, and she refused to drive. She didn't even get her driver's license. She founded a Students Against Drunk Driving chapter at her school and relied on walking or public transportation to get anywhere. Bonnie had a boyfriend, Cameron Miyazaki, a year ahead of her in school. They met during his senior year, but after graduation, Cameron moved to California to study architecture at UC Berkeley. Despite the distance, they maintained a close relationship, speaking multiple times a day through calls and emails. After high school, Bonnie enrolled at the University of Alaska Anchorage to study psychology. Wanting more independence, she moved in with her stepfather, Gary. The arrangement meant a grueling commute. 3 days a week, she walked 2 miles in the freezing Alaskan pre-dawn just to reach a bus stop for her university classes. She packed most of her coursework into 2 or 3 days a week, balancing it with a part-time job at Sam's Club. That walk in the early darkness was lonely and dangerous. Bonnie knew it. She gave Samantha tips for walking alone. Carry pepper spray, be alert. She always had a can of pepper spray in her bag. Then came the morning of September 28, 1994. Bonnie woke at 5 a.m., just as she always did, to make the walk to the bus stop. 9 hours later, another University of Alaska student, Jennifer Braunschweig, was hiking at Chugach State Park, just south of Anchorage. She was photographing the scenery when something in the water below a 33-foot cliff caught her eye. At first, she thought it was debris, but as she got closer, she realized it was a woman's body, face down, fully clothed, floating in the shallow water. Jennifer ran back to her car and drove to the nearest place with a phone, a way station, where she called 911. Alaska State Troopers responded quickly. At first glance, they suspected an accident, maybe a fall from the cliff while sightseeing. But when the medical examiner arrived, they discovered the injuries: severe head trauma, along with drowning. Still, the official ruling was accidental death. One trooper, Robert Beatty, noticed something odd: a single drop of blood on the ground, about 5 or 6 feet from the cliff's edge. It looked as though it had fallen straight down, not splattered, not smeared. To him, that suggested something happened to Bonnie before the fall. The body was identified as Bonnie Christian Craig by the name on the backpack next to the body. By 10 p.m., officers went to Gary's house to inform him. Then they had to tell Karen, but she was out of state, on a sailboat off the coast of Florida, with her boyfriend Jim, attending Jim's brother's wedding. Ken, Jim's brother, broke the news to her in the middle of the night. At first, Karen refused to believe it. But a call to the Alaska State Troopers confirmed the worst. Bonnie had fallen from a cliff and was dead. Karen, who had worked undercover for the Anchorage Police Department, immediately doubted the accident theory. She flew back to Alaska and went to the funeral home to identify Bonnie. As she lifted her daughter's arm, she noticed bruised and swollen knuckles, defensive wounds. She demanded troopers come back and photograph the injuries. To preserve possible evidence for the future, she insisted Bonnie's body be placed in a cement vault. From the moment Karen saw her daughter, she knew this was not an accident. From the beginning, Karen was convinced Bonnie's death was not an accident. But the Alaska State Troopers kept their cards close. They didn't want to reveal too much, even to the family. It was a tactic. They suspected homicide, but they didn't want the killer to know. And in cases like this, suspicion often falls close to home. Sergeant Mike Mars told Karen they were looking at Gary Campbell, her ex-husband, as a potential suspect. Gary wasn't supposed to be in Anchorage on the day Bonnie disappeared. He'd been on a business trip and returned unexpectedly the night before. He had also been upset with Bonnie for staying out past curfew when she was supposed to be watching her younger siblings. Troopers interviewed Adam and Samantha. Both said Gary had been home the morning Bonnie left for the bus stop. Samantha remembered hearing Bonnie up early, around 5 a.m., but she didn't get out of bed to see her. She still regrets that decision. It would have been her last chance to lay eyes on her sister. She recalled that Bonnie seemed to be moving quickly that morning, maybe in a rush, but nothing else seemed out of the ordinary. The questions took their toll. One night, as Gary tucked Samantha into bed, she looked him straight in the eyes and asked, "Dad, did you kill Bonnie?" He told her no, that he would never hurt her sister. With Adam and Samantha both placing Gary at home that morning, he was ruled out. Still, the case was going nowhere fast. By the time Bonnie's funeral came and went, the investigation was stalling. Months slipped by. Then, in 1995, Karen called Mars to ask about something that had been eating at her. Was it possible Bonnie had been sexually assaulted? The troopers admitted they had collected swabs during the autopsy. The results showed male DNA inside Bonnie, but the information had been sealed. She was told it was possible she'd been violated, even though her clothing, jeans, underwear, bra, shirt, and jacket, was intact. Detectives gathered DNA samples from Cameron Miyazaki, Bonnie's boyfriend, and from Gary. Neither matched the sample found in Bonnie's body. Cameron had also been confirmed to be in California at the time of the murder. There were at least 2 eyewitnesses who saw Bonnie walking toward the bus stop that morning, but no one could confirm she had actually boarded the bus. No cameras, no proof, just silence. Then came the first glimmer of a lead. Mars called to tell Karen she could finally see Bonnie's autopsy report. It had been 5 long months since her daughter's death. The official manner of death? Homicide. Dr. Norman Thompson, the medical examiner, had documented multiple blunt force injuries to Bonnie's head, 11 lacerations in all. Her left index finger was broken. If she had still been alive when she hit the water, drowning and hypothermia would have been contributing factors. There were also signs of forceful or rough sexual intercourse. Whether it was consensual or not, Thompson couldn't say. For Karen, this was confirmation. She hadn't been imagining things. Someone had beaten her daughter, possibly assaulted her, and pushed her off that cliff. The troopers started gathering DNA from men who'd crossed paths with Bonnie. A coworker at Sam's Club seemed overly interested in her, but his DNA didn't match. Another coworker acted suspiciously on the day she died, missing a meeting around the time of her death, but his DNA was also a negative. Even a classmate from Bonnie's 7 a.m. English class, mentioned by her instructor as someone who might be involved, was tested and cleared. 3 years passed. No arrests, no closure. Then, in the spring of 1998, Mars called again. This time, he had news. A potential DNA match had come up. A man who worked as a bus driver in Anchorage. He'd been accused of trying to pick up a 14-year-old girl and harassing female passengers. He'd also been a substitute teacher in Pennsylvania, but was fired for making inappropriate remarks to teenage girls. And just weeks after Bonnie's death, he'd left Alaska for Davis, California. Mars flew to California to interview him. The man denied knowing Bonnie and agreed to provide a DNA sample, The results came back. No match. More years slipped away. In 2002, Karen got the chance to speak about Bonnie's case on Unsolved Mysteries. She shared her belief that more than one person was involved in her daughter's death. The DNA match might have ruled out certain suspects, but it didn't prove they weren't part of the crime. By January 2007, 12 years after Bonnie's murder, a new investigative team had taken over. Among them was Trooper Tim Hunyor. One day, while Karen was in the Philippines, she opened her email to find a message from Hunyor. It was urgent. They had a DNA match to a man in New Hampshire's prison system. His name was Kenneth Dion. Born in 1969, he was 7 years older than Bonnie, 25 at the time of her murder. He'd been serving 6 to 15 years for robbery. Although he'd been arrested in 2003, his DNA wasn't added to the Coldest database until late 2006. The match linked him directly to Bonnie. Dion had been in Alaska at the time she was killed. In fact, he'd been out on parole just 2 months after serving time in jail. 2 months later, he was back behind bars for violating parole. Hunyor flew to New Hampshire to interview him. At first, he kept things casual, asking about Dion's life, his background, his time in Alaska. Dion bragged about being a 5th-degree black belt in martial arts and ranking in world competitions. He talked about his marriage. He'd been wed in September 1994, just days before Bonnie's murder, but admitted his life unraveled when he started using drugs. That led to robberies, a failed stint in the military, and years of prison time. When Hunyor asked if Dion knew about Bonnie Craig, Dion said no. But his body language changed, relaxed posture giving way to tension. Before Hunyor could press further, Dion asked for a lawyer. It didn't matter. Investigators soon found an ex-girlfriend willing to talk. She said Dion had once told her he could kill someone and get away with it, and that he couldn't go back to Alaska because he'd done something there. Killed someone. In 2007, Kenneth Dion was indicted for the murder of Bonnie Craig. The courthouse in Anchorage was packed for Kenneth Dion's first pre-trial hearing. The charges: first-degree murder. A pre-trial conference was set for Halloween, October 31st, 2007, and the trial date for December 17th. The prosecution began piecing together a portrait of Dion's life in the months around Bonnie's murder. 2 months before she was killed, Dion had been in jail. He was released on parole, then arrested again just 2 months later for a parole violation. His criminal record was staggering: 18 convictions in total, including 10 misdemeanors and 8 felonies. His crimes ranged from theft and assault to drug offenses. For years, he had slipped through the cracks of the justice system, disappearing from Alaska in 1996 and resurfacing in New Hampshire, where his trouble with the law continued. It wasn't until his DNA was uploaded into Coldest in 2006, more than a decade after Bonnie's death, that the connection was finally made. But DNA, by itself, wouldn't be enough. The state had no murder weapon, no witnesses, and no clear motive. What they did have was the fact that Kenneth Dion's DNA was found inside Bonnie and on her clothing, and they had the testimony of people from his past, people who remembered his violent streak, his obsession with martial arts weapons, and his own words about killing and getting away with it. The trial finally began in May 2011. nearly 17 years after Bonnie's death. The defense team, attorneys Andrew Lambert and Leanne Bauer, came out swinging. In their opening statements, they claimed Bonnie's death was nothing more than a tragic accident. She had fallen from the cliff, they said, striking her head on the jagged rocks below. Yes, she had been with Kenneth Dion that morning, but their sexual encounter was consensual. The defense argued that the investigation into her death was deeply flawed. They pointed out that the state troopers had lost the original crime scene video taken the day Bonnie's body was found. Without that video, they suggested, the case was riddled with gaps and uncertainties. And then, in a dramatic twist, the prosecution discovered the video. After all those years, it had been sitting, misplaced, in the trooper's office. The court recessed for 5 days to process the evidence. When the trial resumed, Trooper Robert Beatty took the stand as the recovered video played for the jury. Beatty was the one who had spotted the single drop of blood on a leaf, several feet from the cliff's edge. To him, that drop was proof something violent had happened before Bonnie went over the side. Expert witnesses added more weight to the prosecution's case. A forensic scientist testified that Bonnie had been physically harmed and forced into sexual activity before her fall. Her pants bore grass stains. The buttons were undone. This was not the scene of an accidental tumble. Dr. Norman Thompson, the medical examiner who had performed Bonnie's autopsy, delivered some of the most damning testimony. He explained that Bonnie had sustained 11 separate blunt force injuries to her skull, injuries too deep to have been caused by a single fall, or even by striking multiple rocks. The pattern suggested multiple blows, possibly inflicted with martial arts weapons like nunchucks or a sai, and yet her facial injuries were minimal, despite landing face down in the water. That fact alone, Thompson argued, was inconsistent with a fatal fall from that height. Witnesses took the stand to describe Kenneth Dion's life in Anchorage. They talked about his martial arts background, his temper, his history of harassing women. Former acquaintances recalled seeing him in the area during the time Bonnie was killed. The jury heard about his criminal record, 18 convictions, a revolving door of arrests, probation, and parole violations. The prosecution argued that after the assault, Bonnie was forced toward the cliff and pushed into the water, either already dead from her injuries or too weakened to save herself. If she was still alive, the icy water and her inability to move would have led to drowning or hypothermia within minutes. The defense countered that none of this proved murder beyond a reasonable doubt. They emphasized the absence of eyewitnesses to the actual fall, the lack of a murder weapon, and the fact that the sexual contact could have been consensual. But the jurors had more than just theories. They had the DNA, the drop of blood, the history of violence, and the haunting confession to an ex-girlfriend. The weight of those details was undeniable. When the guilty verdict was read, Karen Craig closed her eyes. It wasn't triumph. Nothing about this felt like winning, but it was a kind of peace. Kenneth Dion would never walk free again. Dion sat expressionless as the judge handed it down. He showed no remorse, no sign of regret, just another chapter closed in his long criminal record. Through it all, Karen sat in the courtroom, holding on to every detail, every word. She had been saying for years that her daughter was murdered, and now, at last, the evidence was being laid out for the world to see. When the verdict came, Kenneth Dion was found guilty. At his October 2011 sentencing hearing, the prosecution pushed for the maximum penalty. 124 years in prison, without the possibility of parole. They got it. Dion showed no remorse, no acknowledgement of what he had done. For Karen, it was justice, but it was also a life sentence of a different kind. She would carry the loss of her daughter forever. And that's the story of Bonnie Christine Craig, an ambitious young woman with her whole future ahead of her, taken by a man who thought he could get away with murder. He almost did. But in the end, DNA, determination, and a mother's refusal to give up brought the truth to light. I'm Hannah, and this has been Whispers of Crime.